Welcome to this track 3 of our first set of parallel sessions. This session is a continuation of René's introductory talk about international possibilities for collaboration and challenges, and I'm delighted to have 3 speakers, each giving us a different perspective, each trying to say something with a Nordic perspective, something with a perspective on a particular form of European collaboration, and a speaker looking into international perspectives. Starting out with the Nordic perspective, we have Gudmund Høst, who is currently NIC director, but has been involved in different kinds of research collaborations for quite some time. Gudmund has been working for the Norwegian Research Council. He has been chairing the European E-Infrastructure Relation Group. He has been sitting in the board for the Nordic Data Grid Facility for quite some time, but I've had the pleasure of working with him. And he is now currently director for the Nordic E-Infrastructure Collaboration. So please, Gudmund.
Thank you, Josva, for this nice introduction. I will speak then about the Nordic aspects, the e-infrastructure aspects, and also the collaboration aspects of this type of organization that I'm currently directing. The Nordics is characterized by 5 countries. It is 26 million people, and there is a long history of collaboration. I think it's mainly, it can be seen as one of the most successful multinational arenas for mutual learning if you look through history. Well, if you go really long back in history, you will see also that a couple of these countries have had extremely many wars in between them. But but if you look at how it looks today, there are lots of similarities, and mainly I think this is because we have this culture of learning from each other. Anytime there is some, say, educational reform in one of the countries, then the other country will go in, study it, adapt it, and go on with their model, which might be somewhat different and somewhat similar. And then this goes on, relays, and you see today 5 countries that are quite similar in the way they work. E-infrastructure, I will talk about the infrastructure, and in that context, NAIC is not really about operating infrastructure. We don't own any hardware, but in this context, I will talk about the human factor of infrastructure, which I think is one of the most important components. I will talk also about how we collaborate on infrastructure. So NAIC is much more about collaboration on the topic of infrastructure than it is an e-infrastructure in terms of hardware systems by itself. So let's start with the Nordic part. The NAIC board consists of representatives from 5 countries. So there are representatives from 5 research funding agencies and 5 national e-infrastructure organizations. We have directors of all the national infrastructure organizations in the Nordics represented in the board. We focus a lot on how we engage the wide range of stakeholders within NAIC. So how we work is very much a focus on stakeholders. What is a stakeholder? In this context, a stakeholder would be any party, organization, individual who could contribute to the capacity for NAIC to create value in some sense. Or a risk bearer related to our capacity to create value. And I mentioned the research funding agencies here. They are, of course, an important stakeholder. They fund us, they sit in the board, so they are very much part of developing the strategy for NAIC. The national infrastructure organizations are part of this. Academic HPC centers, why are they stakeholders in this? Well, because most of the people who work in the context of NAIC, they are employed at some academic HPC center. An academic HPC center is an organization, often at university, who is coordinated through a national infrastructure organization. But we have to work with these also. There are 6 of these in Sweden, 4 of these in Norway. The other countries are organized a bit differently. Then we have pan-Nordic user communities, such as those groups that have self-organized or are being funded by some Nordic-level mechanism. Nordforsk programs could be. Nordic Centers of Excellence are examples of that. Then I put national users there. Do we work directly with national users? No, we don't. But they are interested in what we do. They're interested in the services that we develop. So they need to be informed in some sense. Service providers, so Nordinet is a service provider to NAIC, in the sense that we need, for parts of our operations, we need networking services. And you could populate these boxes with some faces that you may or may not know. We have national ministries in the same sense as national users. These are stakeholders that we do not engage directly with. This happens through other means, but we need to have some sort of communication. They might be interested in success stories from building infrastructures. The Nordic Council of Ministers, same policy level, and Director of Nordforsk, Gunhild Gustafsson. Nordforsk is the hosting organization of NAIC. How do we do this in practice? Is this just glossy speak? No, we actually have a plan for how we engage with these stakeholders. So we meet with the national infrastructure organizations at least 10 times a year on a regular basis. So, so these are, in that context, the main stakeholders, or those we engage most intensely with. And that's natural. We are supposed to be the common denominator of their interests. National research funding agencies, 4 times a year, board meetings, and so on. I can go down. But we really have a plan for this, meeting with all stakeholders in some sort of regular basis. Some of the operational principles that we have, we want to be as open as possible. We want to be a reliable partner. So it means that all the activities that we initiate, we are open about. So we put out quite early drafts out on our public wiki. People can comment, see what we're doing, look into our cards, and we're open on also how we collaborate. So this is, I'll tell you a little bit about that later. So we prioritize stakeholder engagement in a systematic way. And what we're motivated by, so me and my staff, is to provide added value to researchers, which is sort of the end product, even though we do not always work directly with researchers. This is what is motivating my staff, to provide this added value to help them prosper in their research. And also we try to be a little bit better every year. So everything we do, we want to be a little bit better than we did the last time. This is a digression. I will tell you a little bit about infrastructure development in a historical perspective, a historical model for that. And this is taken from a National Science Foundation report, so NSF report from the US. Authored by Paul Edwards, was the main authors, some others, so a workshop report. But it has some interesting aspects talking about how infrastructures develop. And what they did in this workshop, they tried to look at all the infrastructures. How did they develop? How was the internet born, and how did it develop? What about electricity, other structures? And try to put this into the framework of cyber infrastructure, or e-infrastructure as we call it. So there is often a precursory phase where you have locally constructed and centrally controlled systems. They start linking into networks and internetworks, and this is governed by distributed control and coordination processes. So typically, a locally controlled or locally constructed, centrally controlled system would be an HPC center, a data bank of some sense. Then there's a formation stage where you start technology transfer from one location or domain to another. You adapt to the new conditions. You change things a little bit. And then you also have to adapt to social and cultural context, different organizations, different way of funding things, and different laws. After this, there comes a consolidation phase where gateways are developed and implemented that permit the linking of heterogeneous systems into networks and networks of networks. So gateways could be, for instance, common standards, resource allocation procedures, and so on. And if you apply this model to the Nordics, you'll see that many systems are at the precursor stage. There are large technical systems, and these are centrally and nationally controlled. It's at this stage. And I think NAIC can add value at the formation stage, moving these into the formation stage, where you have technology transfer between the Nordic countries and the disciplines, adapting to the national conditions, giving some technical variations, and adding this layer. And so NAIC, I think, can bring these nationally and centrally controlled systems together by starting to make exchanges and making them work together. And also at the consolidation stage, where we foster development of rather generic gateways, allowing these systems to operate. So common resource allocation procedures, common standards, and so on. The main point I want to make here is that e-infrastructures, at least according to this model, they're not built. You cannot build an infrastructure once and for all. They are grown, so the vocabulary that we should use is instead we should not say build or construct an infrastructure, but we grow it, we foster it, we encourage the development of this, and this goes on and on. Learning from each other, putting things into different contexts, and that's how it develops. And the Nordics, in that context, is just the perfect arena for fostering infrastructures, I think. Because of these social similarities and slight differences, culturally, same thing, quite similar, somewhat different, and also laws. And I think what comes with the culture is openness, trust. There's really a large or high level of mutual trust within the Nordic countries. You trust institutions, and also between the countries. We trust each other so we can collaborate well. So in that way, we can be a test bed for many of these things. And that's where I think they can play a major role. So we want to move away from this picture where you have national silos of systems, large technical systems that do not operate together, that cannot communicate, not interoperate, centrally controlled, towards this picture where you build rock upon rock, you support each other, and really work together, and you have this vast outlook over the rest of the world with the ocean and the mountains totally open. And it does cost some money, so you cannot do this really on a constant budget. So I frequently meet this argument that we should only do things on the Nordic level if it is cost efficient. You should not add to the budget. Well, how would you build the Öresund Bridge on a constant budget, a constant road budget? You simply cannot do it. It's impossible. And you cannot really fund the construction of a road by the users, by the travelers on the road, and build it as you go along. So this doesn't really make sense. We should strive towards the new capabilities and join forces for that. and it will cost money. Let me turn now to collaboration. Our main collaborators are national infrastructure providers. I told you about the way we engage with these. International research infrastructures, so it could be partners in each of the Nordic countries that have some national status. Example would be approved S3 partners by the National Research Councils. They would be such parties. And also Nordic Centers of Excellence. How do we do this? Well, we have two modes of project initiation. It can be topped up by the board, or parts of the board, research council, infrastructure provider, but we also want to invite bottom-up activities. So research communities can come with us with a proposal, and we put it into some structure, and structured process. And this process would be, they approach us with an idea, then send us some memo. It's treated by the administration in NAIC. Then it could go further to some stakeholder forum. So we have one technical provider forum consisting of representatives from the national infrastructure providers. They could treat this. If this is within some topical area, like the biomedical sciences, it will then be discussed by this forum. If there is interest for this, then we want to have some partners coming in with real money. So we pay 50%. The partners have to come in with 50%. Could be in kind, could be in cash. But this creates the right level of ownership, and also an early need to collaborate on these things. So we're not a funding agency in that context. We are a collaborator. We can put partners together, but they need to want to own this and put in some of their own things. Then, if this is a successful project, then we take charge of this. We act on behalf of the partnership, and we enter into service agreements with the relevant partners. Then there's a project defined, usual thing, project manager, steering group, co-funding partners sit in the steering group. Other stakeholders can be in reference groups. And we discovered that there is actually a very good project model that is, well, I would say not extremely good, but it's decently good. And what is better and more important is you can have courses all the Nordic countries on this. So the TITO PPS model is offered in all the Nordic countries in English or in native languages. And that's the model that we standardize on. So one language or one project model. Everybody knows really then what the project is, what the project manager it, what the steering group is, what decision point 4 is, and so on. Which I think is important, and something that can be used also in other forms of collaborations that not necessarily make drives. Then the main part of the collaboration is the people factor, the human capital of infrastructures. To work in a team, we need to focus on how these things work. The team needs to communicate. And we have systematic ways of that too. So using chats, weekly chats, video meetings. So with my executive team, we have, well, Monday morning we have a Cyberfika. So we have 15 minutes where we take our coffee and we go to a Google Hangout and we sit down together and just chat for 15 minutes. Once a week we have a video meeting where we really go through the more tedious stuff, but that needs to be done, and try to look forward. Once a month there's a face-to-face meeting with this group, and I think all groups should work on the same concept. Once or twice a year we have an all-hands meeting for the full organization. And we really now try to focus on how to succeed in these virtual settings. We are totally distributed. It's me and one administrative person at the NAIC office. The rest of the organization is spread out all over the Nordics, and it shall stay that way. So we will not build something separate. We want to be integrated with our partners. But we need to work on how to succeed as a virtual team. You need trust, We need to focus on people issues, soft skills, and also avoid this performance peak. You get enthusiastic, and this maxes out after 1 year, and then people fade away. And then a high-touch environment where it's easy to communicate. There's no threshold for contacting me or anyone else. You can do it in several means, in several ways. So more infrastructure than collaboration, but we collaborate on the topic of the infrastructure. But what on earth are we really doing? I was asked not to tell you too much about this by our chairman. But some activities I could just mention quickly, if you can see this. Well, easy sharing of data, a YouTube for data. That's something something as easy as a YouTube for data. How to share sensitive data, personal data across the Nordics. How can you do that in this test bed of trust and openness? Not really open in this sense, but still trust. How to do cloud computing, offer that as some pan-Nordic service. Then we support physics at CERN with data processing. S3 project in the Nordics, and we also do policy support. So right now we have a project which is about coming up with the science case for Nordic HPC collaboration. So we'll see what comes out of that. Maybe we can finally get some traction on this. So to sum up, 3 things: Nordic infrastructure and collaboration. We need to really use this great opportunity we have in the Nordics for stimulating all types of collaboration. And we need to foster and encourage infrastructure, not build it once and for all. Thanks.
Thank you, Gudmund. So you may already now be eager to ask Gudmund questions, but I would like you to save those until we've had our 2 other speakers, and then I'll invite you all 3 up to sit here, and then we'll do a small panel, since I have a hope that there is plenty of insight and knowledge to be gained from having all 3 of you together. So let me introduce our next speaker, which is Dorte Olesen. Dorte has a long history in the European network arena. She started out doing real mathematics research, but then ventured into becoming an head of IT supply for universities and schools in Denmark. She has been president of Terena for a lot of years, 6 years, then she was not allowed to continue. She has been member of what's called the Xi'an Expert Group, which is partly responsible for the change we are seeing on the European network scene today. So she has a lot of background for explaining the rationale and what's going to happen and the outlook for European network infrastructure for research and education. There we have your presentation. Would you want that or that?
That's a good question. How does this work?
This works.
This simply works. Does this work? Can you hear me? Okay, fine. Then I think I'll just simply use that. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Joshua. Thank you for the invitation to come here. In fact, Joshua is quite right. I mean, for many years, originally, I was a math professor. And you know, when I was sitting here looking at this blackboard, I got so tempted. Have you seen those real old-fashioned chalk down there? And you can wipe it out afterwards. So for a split second, I thought maybe I'll give them a lecture on cross products of seaside dynamical systems. But then I thought, oh, well, perhaps not. That's not why they've come here. So let's stick to what I've promised to talk about, the Xi'an 2020 towards the European Communication Commons. In 2011, the Xi'an Expert Group gave a vision for the future of Xi'an 2020. to be the European Communication Commons, where talent anywhere is able to collaborate with their peers around the world and to have instantaneous and unlimited access to any resource for knowledge creation, innovation and learning, unconstrained by the barriers of the pre-digital world. Now, behind that lay a lot of discussions. We worked for a year in the Giant expert group. We had a lot of interesting presentations from high-end users of networks and other infrastructures, from politicians. And we had a good look at the map that you can see on the screen right now. I hope you can see there is some sort of map up there. And what do you think that map is? Where is it from? Let's start with an easy one. Is it from the US? No, it's from Europe. You can sort of see Europe, right? But not quite. And what are these little stripes, you think? Are they networks? No, they're actually not. I mean, I really should ask you, but I don't have that much time. What do you think it is, Dave? What are those little stripes there? You have any idea? No clue? Yeah, Michael? Data sources. You're getting close. Actually, this is a picture of the collaboration between scientists in Europe who are authoring papers together, who are publishing together. So the vision of the European Communication Commons is really a vision where instead of a blurry picture like that, you could really see Europe. You could really see the whole map. You could even see the Nordics. See, the Nordics are not really there at the moment. So getting all this collaborative activity to go on, not moving people around, but connecting them. And in order to fulfill this vision, we put up 4 goals: to support the knowledge communities by providing world-class connectivity and services, to support the growth of them in both breadth and depth within Europe and opening up to talent beyond Europe's borders, and to push the state-of-the-art of the communication commons by constant innovation and by translating this innovation into a competitive European ICT sector. That is actually a very ambitious goal. And finally, to reorganize to cope with the constantly changing environment. Putting it a little bit differently, you can say, well, researchers need to collaborate worldwide. Data deluge is here. Experimental science needs advanced, complex facilities that can be shared and accessed from all over the world. And research and innovation now happens in a much broader community. Also, education really needs the high-speed networks. It empowers students and their teachers to access knowledge from many sources, ensures they have up-to-date materials, opens up the possibility of individualized education, preparing students truly for the future. Now, fortunately, this report was well received by the European Commission. Just for fun, I brought this picture where you see the Commissioner, Neelie Kroes, in the middle, proudly receiving this report. And fortunately also, when the EC asked a number of other bodies about their opinion, the opinions were very, very positive. That went for the EIRD, went for the Terina, Dante, so on. A lot of people expressed their opinion. It was very positive. So, in fact, the EC has taken action on this. And in the work program for 2014-15, there is now a new construction, a framework partnership agreement between the EC and the NRENs stipulated. And there's been a call requesting a proposal for such a framework partnership agreement with a specific challenge that Xi'an should develop to be recognized as a European communication commons that supports the rise of compute and data-intensive collaborative research and education through innovative services, operational excellence, and global reach. The expected impact is to achieve the vision of the Xi'an expert group. The NDN have by now submitted a proposal for such a 7-year framework partnership agreement. Hopefully it's going to start this coming spring and guarantee an effective partnership with stability and reliability for the partners and all the end users, making every European researcher digital, increasing creativity and efficiency of research, and bridging the divide between developed and less developed regions. Objectives, well, stability or even stepping up the ambitions, the environment, serving all the users from the big science projects to the single talent. Might not even be in a university, might be a citizen scientist. Provide an open, innovative, and trusted information infrastructure for the European knowledge economy. This is the new Xi'an mission. I'll come back to that. Provide secure, cost-effective, and reliable services. Very high speed, connectivity, identity interfederation, resource virtualization, mobility, and trust in order to support the knowledge communities, and provide the means through which the NDN and the R&D community can make a vital contribution to the realizations of Horizon 2020, and thereby also to the bigger political vision of Europe 2020, or the digital agenda for Europe. Now, this proposal is not a project proposal in the old-fashioned sense. There have been a lot of projects running. There is one running right now. But the FPA defines solely the scopes and the priorities to be implemented. Then underneath, over the 7 years, there will be specific grant agreements that will define the work in detail. And I mean, we had this challenge of writing something that's sufficiently high level, sufficiently abstract, and at the same time does say something. So of course it does describe an infrastructure that will provide all these good things we've been talking about, but not down in the detail where you get money and manpower and so on allocated to it like a project. There are six action lines called very imaginatively A, B, C, D, and F. The first one, driving the evolution of the network. That is to ensure the cost-effective operation and development of leading-edge national and international networks. Adopting and developing state-of-the-art technology. Continue to design, build, and implement collaboratively delivered and multi-domain services. Strive to offer affordable, trustworthy, and unrestricted mobility. Maintain the focus on very high-speed facilities, and represent the common interests of European NDNs internationally. To support the knowledge community with a world-leading platform, enable highly demanding and mobile knowledge workers to connect with talent anywhere, offer, again, this is a bit repetitive, secure and trustworthy access from anywhere to anything, almost, facilitate development of e-learning platforms. And, of course, security, trust, and identity comes up again, in many different contexts. It is, of course, very, very important. I mean, with all these data that we want to open up to almost everybody, we need to protect them as well. So, of course, it cannot be really everybody. We need to do something with authorization and authentication. Also, maintain state-of-the-art security through, for example, cooperation with the worldwide community of certs, and operate EduGain. And about the collaborative ecosystem, here we get into also the topic that we need to work together with other e-infrastructure suppliers in computing and data storage, data management, and with other types of research infrastructures, and develop partnerships with industry and SMEs, and liaise and work with all the relevant EC directorates, and that's actually quite a number. Consider the opportunities also for cooperation with communities outside R&D, if they are genuinely interested in benefiting from the operational best practice built up within the Giant ecosystem. And, of course, continue the strong engagement of the Giant partners with the appropriate standardization bodies. A new thing to describe really explicitly is also the human capital. Now, it was also very, very basic for the Giant expert group work to always keep in mind that human talent is the ultimate economic resource, as formulated by Richard Florida in 2002. I mean, the emerging economy is so much an economy of talent. And that goes, of course, for all the researchers, all the students out there, but it certainly also goes for the people working with the research networks, the human capital of the Giant community itself. So this is a focus area for us for the first time ever. Also to really have a focus on developing our own human capital, and of course help develop human capital in the R&D sector and industry and so on, doing that. Then finally, ensuring the long-term future. This has to do with operational models. It also has to do with cost sharing. We do have a unique cost sharing model. It has worked for many, many years. We need still, all the time, continuously, to refine it and to operate it. And we should even more than before leverage the strong purchasing power that we have as the big Giant community, and implement new ways of sharing services between the partners and avoid duplication of new services. And liaise with European and national policy bodies and regional bodies. Hopefully, it will lead to a continued development of the national and international backbone networks, a wider cooperation with enterprises of all sizes, including a closer collaboration with European e-infrastructures in areas like computing and data storage, decreasing the digital divide, and supporting the use of very high-speed mobile access technologies and services. Now, all this has been pretty abstract, so to be a little more concrete, I mean, what is it we are going to expand on and build on? Well, we already have a very nice, we think, e-infrastructure, 500 gigabit super channels in place, not all over, of course, but on some stretches, 5,000 kilometer network infrastructure, more than 1,000 terabytes of data across the network per day, widely diversified footprint, and it's certainly not just a network we are operating. There are a range of services, like EduConf, EduPert, EduGain, EduRoam, which I hope is working in this room. Persona, multi-domain services like bandwidth on demand, and of course the basic Giant services. Now, in order to write the FPA proposal, we first did some strategy work. In fact, it didn't quite finish yet, but we did get some basic input for the FPA. I won't really read the vision. It's pretty long, but it's up there on the screen for you. It says a lot of the things that I've tried to say also in some of the other slides. that we realize the need for access for the knowledge communities to trusted and effective and efficient information services and products, and costs should be decreasing. And also we need the NDNs to move forward by working together within a flexible and agile framework in the most efficient way. The mission is to provide an open, innovative, and trusted information infrastructure for the European knowledge economy. And globally, we want SHARE not just to go on connecting more than half the countries of the world as it does today, but to do even more than that, and really also be able to meet the coming requirements from CERN, from ITER, from the Square Kilometre Array, and other mega-sized science projects, and facilitate the European role in the global development of higher education. So even though this is a very, very impressive map of what we are doing now in connecting to the rest of the world, connecting all the continents, we want to push this even further. And this means also that we want closer collaboration with the networks in the other parts of the world. For example, with the Energy Sciences Network, ESNet. Now, some of you may remember that at the closing keynote at the previous NordVinet conference, Greg Bell described the research networks as scientific instruments. In the next week or two, ESNet will announce a 100 gigabit transatlantic extension to support the scientific work of the US Department of Energy with a core focus on transporting LHC data flows. The SHARE coordinator, Dante, and CERN are partners in this project, and Dante will provide a 100 gig wave in Europe, plus assistance in co-location, staging, and assembly. The ability of Dante to offer a range of services in several countries rapidly and for a reasonable price was an important consideration here for ESNet. Now this work, a little bit in contrast, I would say, to what René said in the opening, we believe is closely coordinated with the NREN participating in ANA 100 gig and the global network architecture discussion. So I think there's a lot more collaboration that perhaps was sketched in that speech. But we need to push that, and this is certainly the intention. And to end up with a little more concrete examples, let's see, what are these big projects? It's something like radio astronomy, sending vast amounts of data from multiple telescopes around the world to a supercomputer in the Netherlands for processing images in real time. This is done by connecting radio telescopes to high-speed networks, sending the data for real-time processing and instrument monitoring. And this has really revolutionized the data sharing with the SHARE and the NRENs, relevant NRENs joining this. Similarly, you can see examples in the biomedical sector to manage the skyrocketing volume of biological information. And also in the arts, where we get examples of how are we going to grow these communities. This has been going on for some years now. It now connects Latin America and Europe, and there are more than 1,000 students participating in courses. This is a new way of teaching about opera. Wouldn't have been possible before, but this is just an example, one of the many, of how we can really push this collaboration forward so that we will be able to transform the research and education in Europe and all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorte. And thank you for being so good at sticking to the time. We are very much on schedule, so please have a seat. And let me introduce our next speaker, which is Dave Lambert from Internet2. Dave also had a long career in research networking. He has been working at a number of universities. He is now president and CEO of Internet2, but apart from that, you have been sitting in, I gather, almost uncountable number of committees and advisory boards relating to to internet technology. So I'm very much looking forward to your U.S. global perspective on the challenges that lies ahead of us. There you go.
Let me get this started. Well, first of all, thank you very much for you. Let's see whether our
Patience.
Hang on. Thank you very much for the invitation. This is my first trip to the NordGenet meeting and an opportunity. I know I meet many of you at other meetings, but it's really my first opportunity to get a chance to be able to spend time with you, and I really am enjoying this process. Let me first off say that Dorte is just up here talking about the European approach to planning. And I have to say, I find myself, as we do in the U.S., quite often envying that ability to sort of bring folks together and look at the long term. We don't do that in the U.S. Our just as sort of the U.S. economy is driven by the interplay of markets and the government plays a relatively minor role, the same is true in R&E networking in the United States. While the government is certainly an important partner of ours, Internet 2 is owned by the U.S. research universities and operates without any annual operating funding from the U.S. government. And so what really drives our planning are sort of an intersection of three things. The challenges and opportunities that face our research university members and what they're having to deal with to be successful as both U.S.-based and global leading institutions of higher education and large-scale researchers is what drives our priorities. We're also driven heavily by changes in the technology landscape. And then again by the innovation capability that exists within our community. And so where we go is really a byproduct of those three things. So I thought it'd be useful maybe this morning to spend just a little bit of time talking initially about what we see happening in that space of the intersection of our institutional members' needs, what's changing in the technical landscape, what's happening in the innovation space. And then I'm going to come back around toward the end to look at another activity that sort of rolls up over top of many of the things we're talking about here that is an effort currently being engaged in to sort of figure out how to create a higher level of global leadership and coordination. So I want to talk about 10 things that are shaping what we're having to respond to right now. And none of these, I don't think, are unfamiliar to you. And you can read the slide, so I won't say a lot about these things. We need to move this along relatively quickly. But I think one that is certainly forefront for us right now is educational and institutional transformation. It's no longer being solely driven by economics, but by a complex confluence of factors for us in the U.S. Unsustainable financial models. Our governments, outside of putting money into student financial aid at the bottom, have virtually abandoned large-scale support for even the public education institutions of higher education in the United States. Even for the great public universities like the Berkeleys and the University of Michigans, a portion of their budget derived from their state funding sources is now approaching single digits. This extraordinary explosion in pathways to learning opportunities, deconstruction and disaggregation of learning objects. One of our great educational leaders in the U.S., David Ward, who's quite a traditionalist, recently referred to what's happening here as an irreversible change in higher education. And we've been sort of watching this for some time, and things are now truly changing, exhibited in the rise of open content, MOOCs, flipped classrooms, but more interesting, operating in the context of globalization, that the global boundaries around education are falling away. And students go all around the world. They sample their education all around the world. And even the most conservative higher education leaders in the U.S. have sort of given up their fight, their rearguard action against this dramatic change in education and see it as blended. As I said earlier, though, this is happening in the context of the globalization of research and education, where national is the new local and global is the new national. inside the U.S., where I think, you know, depending on the world rankings, you know, whether it's the Times of London or the other rankings, we have somewhere in the vicinity of 40 to 50 institutions that have substantial global presence. And I think virtually, both private and public, and I think virtually every one of those institutions have come to the brutal realization that they cannot exist as viable economic entities, depending upon the revenue from research and education that comes from the United States alone. And they're aggressively moving out globally, much of it driven, you know, part strategic and part simply following the wisdom attributed to that famous U.S. bank robber of the 1920s, Willie Sutton, who basically said, you all know this, when they ask him why does he rob banks, come on, that's where the money is, right? And the economy is now global. It's not national. And if you're going to be a player in the research and education space, you have to go globally. But the same thing's happening in research, just as sort of the individual investigator research funding model was supplanted by national scale research projects over the last 2 or 3 decades. The scale of the remaining big challenges, and you all understand this very much in Europe, is now requires a global level of organization. No single country can afford the level of investment in these kinds of capabilities. And so the exciting thing for those of us in the R&D networking business is that the most critical infrastructure of globalization is fast networks, applications at scale, and access to content. And that's what we do. And so it makes us very relevant to what's happening in this space right now. But then there's another change that's happening, and that is the emergence of the internet and digitization is quickly making this the age of content, right? That just putting networks out there to be networks has not much currency anymore. It really is about getting to content. And you see that content coming from every direction in the universities, from OpenCourseWare, from Research Data Alliance, and all of these entities. It really, really, truly becomes about content. And it's questionable, it seems to me, whether you can even make the argument any longer that there is an economic model, a sustainable business model that can be built around being in the network business, which we're all in. The business models have now been essentially redefined at the content level. If what you have isn't critical to delivering content, you're not very valuable to people. The good thing as well here is the higher education, the institutions that are part of our community, is the source of the majority of academically relevant content. We've just really failed as an enterprise broadly to be able to monetize that. The other piece that's coming, you saw a lot in the first discussion this morning, and that is this sort of co-emergence of the concepts of big data and the fourth paradigm of science. And this ability, this sort of recent ability that the technology gives us to generate, store, and analyze large quantities of data has ushered in essentially a new age of science that isn't driven as much by the old scientific model and more by the emphasis on mining data and moving from data to theory instead of moving from theory to data. And this is transforming every science. You saw a great presentation this morning on big data. The only point I would make in terms of the real drivers here that weren't really a focus of this morning's discussion was the enormous impact of the intersection of big data and what's happening in genomics and biosciences research, which is really very quickly now becoming, even relative to traditionally large data sciences like physics, is now becoming the driver of the outer boundaries of what represents big data. The amount of data that comes off the medical instruments, the genomic instruments, is extraordinary. The amount of data sort of collapsing you've got to do and munging you have to do is enormous. And the need to have that data in real time, often providing feedback into the surgical theater, into the clinical space, is radical relative to what we've done. But then you're dealing as well. And it's not like one of these things is happening. They're all happening at the same time with the virtualization of IT infrastructure. You look at the enormous impact that the virtualization of storage and computation has had. Now we're crossing the boundary where we're seeing the virtualization of networks. And we're not only getting the third effect of the virtualization of networks, but we're going to see the interaction effect of the virtualization of networks, storage, and computation. The internet, as we know it, look at the difference between the internet technologies today and what we knew 5 years ago. 5 years in the future, it's going to be more different. And it's going to be driven heavily by virtualization. Then another phenomenon that you're all noticing, and that is individual empowerment is the new expectation. It's not a matter of delivering solutions for industries or solutions for universities. It's a matter of delivering services that are tailored to individuals. The success of the new consumer technologies, Google, Facebook, PDAs, that are easily customizable to individual use is fundamentally changing the expectations that people have. To see, they have an expectation for being able to build their a la carte experiences, whether it's the combination of technologies they want to use, whether they're on our university campuses or not. It's also, interestingly here, to see how much pressure there's going to be for students to want to get a bundle to do their own a la carte degrees, and we're beginning to see those kinds of things happening. And for researchers in research groups and virtual groups to be able to want to construct their own combinations of technologies. We can no longer depend on just simply handing them packages of technical solutions, much as the telecom industries and the cable industries have been debundled in the last few years. I would argue that NRENs are debundled as well, and we've got many areas which we have to play. This is all playing out at the same time, of course, that we finally crossed that line where mobility is becoming a really true critical component of what we do. Obviously, the introduction of wireless networks and smartphones and tablets has created this expectation that any service can be accessed at any time and any place of the individual's choosing. This has become a huge challenge for IT leaders in higher education because of the proliferation of devices, the needs to expand wireless service. Interesting question, how will it shift the impact of the structure of education, for instance, to deliver it at the right time where the learner is through the technology they have available to them? How much teaching can you get a degree on one of these? Okay, well, people are, that's developing a lot of places, including a group I work with who's delivering degree programs on cell phones in refugee camps around the world. Okay, that is kind of thinking out of the box. Then again, we've been brought into this new sort of domain here that's been talked about this morning, where we're now having to think about the translational relevance of what we're doing. More than in the U.S., and I know you're confronting this issue in Europe too, more than half of Internet2's university members are public institutions, which have outreach missions, and even our private universities have significant service missions. And so now what we're seeing, it's making a real impact, is just as we've been watching we always call these things R&E networks, but they've been most of this big R, right, and this little E. Well, we've been seeing the E get bigger and bigger. Now we're starting to see the third mission of public institutions, the service mission, get larger and larger. And we're being looked at not just to provide support for the research community, but our governments are looking at how that relates to economic development, what we call community anchor advancement, the K-20 school system in the U.S. and around the world, the public museums, the libraries, the public safety organizations. We're being pulled into how we take the innovation that's happening in our community and translate this into a much, much broader kind of impact. In the U.S. right now, there are approximately 200,000 community anchors. Those are K-12 schools, public libraries, public safety, arts institutions. Right now, approximately half of those get connectivity to the research and education networking infrastructure. And so this has expanded the concept of what our community is remarkably. And then Dorothy talked about this already, and I won't go a lot into it. You all get this in Europe, that the trust fabric, the combination of identity, privacy, and security now have to become the kind of constraint model within which the work we do obviously has to operate. With a focus on MOOCs, how do we assure, for instance, a student in India is taking a course for credit is actually the one doing the work? If content becomes the new currency of the realm for higher education, how do we protect our property? If our medical schools are going to lead the genomics revolution, how do we assure individual privacy is protected? And all of our current approaches to assuring identity, protecting privacy, and securing information are structured around the concepts of residential identity. And as we talk now about the way our communities push out, these will not be suitable for the envisioned environment I have been talking about. But then along comes what I think is the most critical element of this, and that is the concept. So you've got 9 of these things, all happening at the same time. And they're happening fast. They're happening so fast that all the abilities we built up over the years to do planning at the aggregate strategic level, to do planning at the project level, to very carefully sort through what our alternatives are and make wise, guided decisions about how we invest our money and build long-term plans, is being blown away by the speed that everything is moving at now. And while we've been living with Moore's Law now for a long time, applications have historically advanced less slowly. Apple blew that away with the concepts of the App Store. And in the application space, there's the sort of pre-App Store era, and there's the post-App Store era that is characterized by very, very different thinking about the availability of applications and how we meet. So the real problem that creates for us is how in the world do we do the deliberation? How in the world do we apply the traditional mechanisms we've used for planning in a space where by the time you figure out what you're going to do, somebody else has already done it, or the need is different, or things have morphed, or the expectations are so high that all of a sudden, you're the Tyrannosaurus Rex, not the fast-moving entity that you were, and all this becomes a challenge. So when you look at all 10 of those things, each one of them individually is a daunting task. All 10 taken together create the context that is going to drive what happens with research and education networks, from Internet 2 to GEONT to the Nordic networks to the networks in Europe and Asia and South America and Africa, faster than anything else has. Many of you have seen this slide, so I won't really dwell on it. I use this as a terrain of meeting, playing off of sort of an older definition of what NRINs are. We have to change our stripes here. We have to become something different. We have to become and are becoming a much more active agent. Now what I want to spend a few minutes talking about is how we achieve global coherence through collaboration. Remarkably enough, the global engagement of research and education networks has been an extraordinary phenomenon that has developed in a way that quite often, frankly, surprises me. How much we've been able to achieve in terms of global interconnectivity with leaders and followers at various times in that process. What concerned me, and I think concerned a number of my colleagues in some of the major research and education networks, was that the rate at which we're moving global infrastructure and collaboration just simply is not likely to keep up with the enormous demand that we're confronted with to do that. And so a couple of years ago, a few of us formed what we call the Global NRIN CEO Forum, and you can read what it is here. It's committed basically to create a facility for consultation and collaboration, to accelerate the implementation and adoption of solutions using clear articulation of the issues and solutions and its collaborative influence, and to transfer the results. We have four active working groups. The one that is most that I think most of you are aware of, Renee talked about this morning, is the global network architecture. Here, the goal with the global network architecture is to create a cohesive architecture that the whole world has contributed to. It's not the extension of Internet 2 to the world, or the extension of GEONT to the world, or the extension of any network to the world. It is beginning to craft a jointly owned and invested in infrastructure for the globe that is the same thing we've been doing within our countries and across our continents and at the campus level for a long time, coherently engineered through joint acquisition, collaborative acquisition, consortial acquisition, open exchange points, and coordinated operations. We're also working on global identity and interfederation, pushing toward the world that all these applications can work together in. Global service delivery, how in the world, again, Renee talked about this morning, do we get over some of these hurdles of local procurement that allow us to end up with a services layer that can serve research groups and universities that are not organized at the national level, but are organized at the global level? And then how do we get our collaboration tool sets to work at the global level? How can we make doing video conferencing at the global level as easy as email? That's directory driven. We also have some study groups in place currently looking at security and privacy in the R&E world, how we more effectively engage the large-scale global science projects to bring the mass investments that they're making into the coherent global framework, continue to focus on knowledge sharing across the global community to support emerging NRINs in particular, and then scratching our heads a lot and trying to figure out how in the world we can tap into this extraordinary revolution that's happening in mobility. So thank you very much for your time this morning, and that's my update.
And thank you. And let me now invite Dorte and Gudmund to join Dave at the desks up here. And I hope you now have had time to think about some questions that you would like to post. So please.
Hi, I'm Cecilia Volkert, Deputy IT Manager, Swedish Agricultural University. I have a question for Gudmund, and that is, you were talking about YouTube for data. We are currently working with a rather huge project for archiving and making our research data accessible. And it would be really interesting to see what is the time schedule for your service.
Thanks for that question. So the term YouTube for data was a term used by one of the developers of this service. But we are, let me tell you about this. So this is so the context is several of the Nordic countries participate in EU projects. Developing European level services. One of these projects is the EU DOT project, which is several years, which is now moving maybe into its next phase. So at least they have applied for further funding. There's a service in there called B2 Share. And that service, so one of the things then that the Nordics can do, that they could do, is maybe to help to customize tools that have been developed at the European stage for the Nordic user communities. So in that sense, bringing value back, not in terms of just getting money back that we have invested in, but really to get a better service back for funding that has gone into it. So NAIC has then co-funded the project, which has been customizing this B2 Share tool to Nordic research communities. So this has been done for, I think, a handful of specific user communities. So the service is up and running, and you should look at EU DOT pages.
Is it on? Yeah. You've all three talked about collaboration, and I'm thinking about the dynamics of the collaboration and the impact it had. I think you started at the Nordic level with how your processes came to common decisions and built communities. And you've talked within Europe about the practice throughout the years, and you have delineated a development of looser coupled and devices, and how you build up very accelerating the level of interaction. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what is the depth of the collaboration we need, and what does that mean for how we need to build organizations, whether it's NRENs or universities, and how do you see the future unfolding there?
I think I can relate this to a whole sort of set of activities that we see happening out there. In the first place, let me say that anything that I think the Global Forum, for instance, has worked on is not meant to be sort of a criticism of past models of collaboration. In fact, one of the challenges in the global space has been, in some senses, there are enormous numbers of collaboration activities that go on, but a relative infrequency that those collaboration activities result in common solutions that can be worked at the global level. And I think one of the sort of underlying sort of concerns that those of us who wanted to pull together the Global Forum had was that often you had the leadership going off into little pods and sort of making leadership decisions about something that should be done at the collaborative level that was disconnected from the conversations that the technologists and the application folks were having. And then you often had these working groups of technologists who were building great solutions, but who weren't able who weren't in a position to make the investment decisions or the political decisions necessary to move across a line. It's easy, well, I won't say it's easy, but it's a lot easier to construct a technical architecture for interfederation than it is to address the political challenges of sharing identity credentials across a global space governed by a multitude of different legal regimes and privacy policies, et cetera. And so a good portion of what we were trying to do with the Global Forum was to figure out a way to punch through that kind of breakdown that existed between, sort of the collaboration that was going on down here in the trenches, and how you got that collaboration translated into things that could be very useful to people, and sort of try to push that out then across what we would call a sort of a critical mass, or what we often call a community of willing and able participants who are willing to take a deep breath and say, well, look, EduGain's not a perfect model for interfederation, but it's closer than anything else that we have. It does it looks at the generalized issues very well. It does not have nearly the depth of tools and capabilities that exist for integrating commercial providers of services that we have in common in the U.S., but let's start somewhere. And so let's take a deep breath and say, at a global level, we are going to commit to using EduGain as the framework for that. And then we get the focus of that work on actual deployment instead of sitting around and having the endless circular arguments. I think my primary concern here, and I know the concern of my colleagues, was simply how do we, not the fact that there wasn't enough collaboration, but the fact that we wanted to make the collaborations that were going on much more effective in terms of translating into real things that became useful to more than just a small number of people in a shorter amount of time.
I'd like to comment on that just quickly. I think this is an excellent example. In my view, this collaboration has to happen at all levels, from the technical level and up to the sort of the policy level where you have the coordination. And what is important in many cases is that what you can see in the Hindcast is this path dependence of solutions that are chosen. So, for example, EduGain is a good example. This solution has been chosen, and then a lot of the developments happen afterwards is because you chose exactly this solution. You could think of Excel, the spreadsheet. I mean, what would data sharing, data analysis be? Where would we have been today if nobody invented that, but invented something else instead? So you need it at all levels, I think, because the further development, it depends on, or the path depends on where you chose, what you chose.
Yeah, well, I agree very much with what has already been said by both Dave and Gudmund, and I would say that at the European level, of course, our point of departure is what happens at the national level, where the NRENs are in very close touch with their constituencies and with the universities, with the research centers. But then we have this fantastic collaboration ongoing between all the European countries, where we manage now to really get the top experts of the different technical fields and create critical mass in some advanced areas when we go together, but still keep the contact down to the roots, to the national constituencies. And at the same time, I mean, recently we also now have contact with the big international users in a new way at the European level. But it's very complex and I mean. In my view, of course, the Global CEO Forum is a new and modern way of doing what was done also in the early days in what was called the CERN, the Coordination Committee for International Research Networking. Then it was sort of sleeping for some years, but I think it's come up again, and it certainly also has existed if you go back in time and been very, very important. And I think we are in a new phase now with services where it becomes important again.
Lars Nielsen, and I'm a student of Technical University of Denmark, and I'm very glad to hear that it is trust, education, community, and access to contents you're working on, because whenever I do something, I run into the law when I'm trying to reverse engineer the digital signing platform we have for the Danish state. Then they say, oh, you cannot decompile this and research this because there are patents in here. And then we ask, oh, can we read the patent because you should have some patent numbers for us? Then they say, no, they are secret patents. So in that way, you cannot learn anything. And then we, of course, have, the marketplace. As you say, we cannot share things. I can give you this book, I can sell you this book, but if I have it as an e-book, I cannot. We have a court ruling 2 years ago from Oracle, but nothing has happened. So I run into the law all the time, and how do you think, how will you deal with that and EULAs and Computer Fraud and Abuse Acts? How will you deal with that?
Anybody else? I mean, you raised a number of issues there, and you know, every one of the issues you raised, you know, represents, I think, in one form or another, both has the potential to represent a set of constraints on what we do in information, you know, with information in the research and education space. It also, though, I think, represents significant opportunities for what we do as a broad global collaborative community. We have, for instance, let me give you an example of where we have fundamentally where we've made a major difference. The Research and Education Network community have made a major difference in the paradigm for accessing digital networks. You do not pay for your digital network. Well, the ones, you know, setting aside the cellular mobile business, which we didn't have a lot to do with or a lot of ability to influence, you don't pay by the bit for data, do you? You pay by bandwidth. If the R&E networking community hadn't, as the process of extending these internet service, TCP/IP internet services into the commercial community, believe me, you would be paying by the bit for data, okay? And so we have, with our 20, 30-year history in research and education, in shaping the fundamentals of the current data network infrastructure. We have improved our ability to access that marketplace, and we have made the marketplace better for everyone. The challenge for us now is how do we extend that influence to other arenas that are equally as important to our research and education institutions and practitioners. One instance you give is open publishing. And across the board, we have both lots of active projects and very high aspirations for open publishing, which is probably the biggest, most pathological marketplace that exists, in which we're consumers. The terrible thing being that we generate at least 85 or 90% of the intellectual property that goes into the creation of the books that you use. We sell it for a pittance to the commercial publishing industry. We buy it back, and then our faculty and librarians make us build buildings to house it. All of which is this really, really pathological circular system that, quite frankly, there are INRINs all over the world now engaged in very, very active projects designed to break that structure. We're working on, we're working on it in the U.S. I know there are various projects working in Europe. I think that's an instance. I think the other thing that you see is that's different between the commercial community and the higher education community is the full commitment that we all have to open software, to open networks, and all of the things that come along with that. I think the key for us, as we did in the networking space, is how do we project the leadership of the research and education networking community in a way that allows us to capitalize on our early innovation engagement. In every one of these areas, we're always the leaders. The question for us is, what do we overtly do to not just take the technologies and throw it over the fence into the marketplace and then buy it back, but what do we do to shape the creation of the marketplaces in a way that is more advantageous for our own institutions and the members of our own institutions, and conforming to open principles and pricing and acquisition principles that are more coherent and make more sense than the ones you currently deal with. That is something that research and education networks all over the world are struggling with and focusing on.
Okay, so a quick follow-up question or a comment on the EduGain work. I appreciate it because I'm seeing three panelists here. I see the Nordic region, I'm seeing the European region, I'm seeing the US region. Could you elaborate a little bit on the collaboration methods? When you collaborate with a small group of partners, the collaboration normally, well, not always, but sometimes goes very smooth because you have sort of similar goals, traditional, same sort of history. But when we try to collaborate on a global scale, those differences becomes larger and the expectations on the outcome is a little bit different. So what do you see as a way forward or a success story in creating collaborations that will work for everybody rather than for a small set of participants?
I could start off on that. Well, in an ideal world, everybody would collaborate with everybody, and we will move forward. But I think in practice, you see that it's context dependent, depending on the problem at hand. But you can progress in several ways. So the Nordic model for collaboration is usually that you would, to get funding, you would usually need to be, out of 5 partners, at least 3 come together to get moving. It's quicker to get agreement if you are few partners. You can take larger steps at each time. But what you also see is that sometimes you can start with only 2 partners and the others will come in. And there's a beautiful example on that if you look to weather forecasting in the Nordic region. So Norway and Sweden now share the same operational system. So they have one computer doing the calculation for both Norway and Sweden. This works beautifully. It's only 2 partners, but now the other Nordic countries want to be in on this because they see that this is so useful. So I think it can start in several ways, and it depends on the goal.
Well, I mean, I think that we have already said something about this. I mean, that we are getting the act together much better now at the global scale. Of course, it's also because there are obvious needs, because science is becoming global, learning is becoming global, and I think that you know, if you work on this the way we do now, I think we can make some really good progress. Of course, it's still true that with many partners, it takes a little bit longer to agree on everything. And maybe you don't agree on every single little thing, but that's also part of the new strategy for Jean, that even though we underline the need for consensus, we also say in specific areas, once you get down into details, you don't have to agree on everything. But it's really, I think it's good to have the basic point of departure that you need to agree on the overall goals and where you want to go. And if you agree on that, then you can also tolerate, or you can even sometimes have a benefit from taking slightly different approaches, and then get it together that way.
Yeah, I think sort of looking at what have been successful, what I think have been successful collaborations in you know, some activities that have sort of sat and spun their wheels for decades in some cases, there are probably 2 or 3 principles that I would think are most important. Number one lesson I think is that coalitions, the willing and able, are very important. That is when you set out to do something, simply having people that agree about what they want to do is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You have to have a group of people who agree on what they want to do, who are willing to bring resources to the table to do it, okay? And it's not always the case that the people who have all the resources agree on anything. And so, you know, the key is finding those moments when you have that combination of people who are willing to jump in, and then I think from that point in time, it requires a very different set of attitudes on the part of the leaders, who have to understand that they're not just working to achieve their own ends, but they're working to achieve everyone's ends. And you know, and the quote followers, who are willing to be courageous followers, who are willing to say, hey, it's not right for me right now to be in the middle of this. You know, number one, I'm working on something else. Number two, I may not quite agree on the approach that's being taken, but I'm not going to sit on the sidelines and throw rocks at these folks. I'm going to let them go work on something and see if we can get a solution to get to a point of something concrete as quickly as possible, because then you can really begin to shape it for the future. So I think it takes a very, very different set of attitudes. That involves a lot more trust than we often have. You know, I think it means not getting entangled in geopolitics. If we're going to work, for instance, with our colleagues, you know, and governments have this remarkable ability to throw a geopolitical hand grenade in the middle of a lot of things that we're trying to work on. And so we have to do our best to stay sort of clear of those kinds of things. And then I think we have to get better and better and better at what I would call what an academic would call the diffusion stage of what we do. That it's not just about finding a solution, it's about talking about it, it's about creating the mechanisms to see that those people who don't have the same capabilities that the leaders have, to be able to actually get in the game. And often that means, quite frankly, a very different set of people are the ones that tend to get very excited about doing those kinds of things. And then you also have to have, so it takes everybody, you know, it takes courage, it takes wise leaders, it takes courageous followers, and it takes, you know, it takes people who are really good at operating things on a sustainable basis. And if you can bring, wherever you can bring those things together into the same issue, I think we find global solutions.
Thank you. The time is up. Lunch is approaching. Let's thank our three speakers for being well prepared, having good insights, plenty of good comments during this small mini panel. It has been a pleasure seeing you. Thank you.
We stay on time?
We stay on time. Okay. One more